I don't think my mother or my father ever slept, because as I think about it, they were always up busy going.
He said it was really something that someone with the talent of Wendell Petty would come to a little community up in Idaho and serve these people for so many years.
Just as I knew that my father could answer any question I would give him, I had the feeling that my mother could do anything.
The theme that was almost like a family motto, though it wasn't on a plaque, was, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing well.
It all started on a Greyhound bus. There was a pretty girl, a lonely soldier boy, and a long, long road ahead.
There was this soldier on the bus that was flirting with every girl he could find available that was anywhere near his age, and he finally ended up on the seat next to me.
Next two seats to the side were taken, and the one closest to me was being occupied by a neat-looking, high-class-looking gal about my age.
And when he got off the bus at Salina, I had agreed that he could come to Monroe the next day to visit me there, and so that began our association.
As with so many couples of their generation, it's the war that brings Margaret Adams and Wendell Petty together. Although they both come from small Mormon towns in Utah, their backgrounds are very different. Margaret's parents both graduated from college, very unusual for the times. They are school teachers, and the family moves frequently with her father's assignments in the LDS seminary system. There are 8 children, a loving, well-ordered, hard-working family with few material resources and an abundant religious faith.
Teachers need something to augment their salary, and he always had bees. So we always had a bee house or a honey house, and it was always fun having all that work going on, although when we were stung with the bees sometimes it wasn't so neat, but it was an interesting life.
Margaret is an excellent student with a flair for drama and public speaking. She plans to attend Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. But first, she needs a job.
After I graduated from high school, I went to Salt Lake to seek my fortune, so to speak. I ended up working at Western Union. I trained as a telegraph operator. We would type out this perforated tape that would come out, and we had to be able to read the tape to see if we made any mistakes. We would have all of these different stations. A telegram would come in here from San Francisco. It was to go to New York, and we had girls on roller skates in this big room that would pick up the message here and skate it over to New York or Chicago or small towns or wherever, and it was a fun experience.
Wendell was born in Salina, Utah, and lives there until he leaves for college at age 17. His father is a skilled auto mechanic. Wendell's parents give their 3 sons food and shelter, but after age 9, the boys earn their way in everything else.
I don't think I was ever given a dollar for anything by my father. He provided us with clothing, and as we got on up into 9 or 10 years of age, we had to earn our money for our clothing.
As a boy, Wendell sketches and paints with watercolors. Then, one day, an elderly neighbor gives him a box of oil paints. and Wendell discovers an artistic interest that fascinates him for the rest of his life.
It was like getting a new set, and the brushes were with it. And one day he said, "Well, I might as well give these oil paints to you, Wendell. I know you will use them." I was using watercolors up till then. And it's just something I've continued doing in my spare time, and I've had a lot of fun in painting. It's nice to create things that you look at and say, "Ah, I did that."
Wendell is an exceptional student. He's valedictorian of his high school graduating class of 1938 and graduates summa cum laude from the University of Utah in 1942. He dreams of becoming a doctor.
Neither Wendell or I believed in war marriages, but then when you find yourselves involved, you sometimes do things that maybe aren't the wisest things to do at the time. I think if it hadn't been wartime, we'd have both wanted to have had more time to get to know each other better before we committed to marriage. We had a war wedding, chivalry on a half track, and all that went with that. That was on April 8th, 1944, I think, when we got married. And the next month, on May the 31st, our marriage was sealed in the Manti Temple.
6 months later, Wendell Petty is on a troop ship, dodging German submarines across the North Atlantic on his way to England. 4 days after Christmas 1944, he lands in Belgium with the 11th Armored Division of Patton's Third Army. They begin the drive east to destroy Hitler's evil dream.
I spent most of my time quizzing captured German soldiers. I had taken 2 years of German in college, and so I was, as it turned out, the only soldier in the entire division that could speak and converse with and understand Germans. Ich war auch in Deutschland eine Jahre. I was in Germany a year, and I spoke a lot of German, so I became fairly fluent at it.
But Wendell does much more than interrogate German prisoners. From the Battle of the Bulge in January 1945 through the German surrender in May, Wendell reorganizes 11th Division headquarters 35 times during their lightning advance across Germany. On his own initiative, Wendell designs and operates a unique mobile combat communications center that sends vital battle information from the front lines back to headquarters. In the summer of 1945, Master Sergeant Wendell Petty is awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service in combat.
While he was in Europe, in the fighting that was going on over there, I didn't know from one day to the next what to expect. You just lived your life and hoped for the best, I think, prayed and tried to do the best you could.
One incident that happened that I must have told 50, 100 times since then, because it was, to me, very interesting. This was a captured German airman, one of the Luftwaffe pilots, and I wanted to know about their air power. So I said, "Wie ist der Luftwaffe? Ist es stark und gesund?" And, ach, nein. I said, "Well, tell me about him." And the guy I was interviewing says, "Ach, wenn wir in die Luft gesehen und schwarze Flugzeuge sehen, sind sie englische. If we look into the sky and see black airplanes or English. Wenn wir silberne Flugzeuge sehen, sind sie amerikanische. If they're silver planes, they're American. Wenn wir keine Luftwaffe sehen, ach, sind sie die Luftwaffe. If we don't see any in the air, it's the Luftwaffe.
When Germany surrenders in early May 1945, Master Sergeant Petty finds himself high in the Austrian Alps. There is a beautiful trout stream nearby and hungry villagers eager to trade fine Austrian fishing tackle for fresh American food.
So I traded an apple for this hook and line, and traded stuff that was in my larder, so to speak, for tackle, and a lot of hours catching the forelle, Deutsche braune Forelle, German brown trout. And for the trout, we got wonderful meals for us. I sat down to some awfully good trout dinners. My price was 2-3 apples.
While he was overseas, Wendell wanted me to be where there was a hospital since I was pregnant, so I went to Salina. There was the hospital there. My apartment was just above the bakery, next door to the garage, and Wendell's dad would come up nearly every day to see his little grandson and play with him for a little while, and then I had a nice little buggy that I'd bought for him, and I would walk the several blocks up to see Wendell's mother each day, so we'd spent time with them.
I first became acquainted with our son, Gene, our first, by a picture in a letter that was sent to me overseas. And I thought, gee, that's a pretty good deal. I kept that close to my heart in a safe pocket in my uniform for the rest of the time we were in Germany until the war was over.
When the lights go on again, all over the world, and the boys are home again, all over the world, and rain or
Wendell comes home from the war in the fall of 1945 and meets Gene for the first time. A second son, Jerry, joins the family a year later. Thanks to the GI Bill, Wendell exchanges his combat fatigues for a white lab coat and enrolls at the University of Utah College of Medicine. He graduates at the top of his class in 1950.
Father graduated #1 in his class at the University of Utah in his medical school, and he essentially had a photographic memory.
He was what his classmates called the DAR, which is the darned average raiser.
I started a surgery residency at Salt Lake City Veterans Hospital, but the stipend that was paid was really not enough to live on.
So he decided to go out into general practice, and he chose Shelley, Idaho as a spot to go to because the fishing's good in Idaho, and that's very, very important in the family. The first several months in Shelley, we didn't do too well financially. We didn't know if we were going to make it or not. And then in January, a flu epidemic hit the town. And as people got to know Wendell and his intelligence, his ability, and his integrity, his practice grew and grew until it was more than he could handle.
General practice in those days in a small community, in addition to office practice and accidents and wounds and fractures and cuts, I had to do hernia repairs and hemorrhoidectomies. That's getting down to the basic facts of life. And inguinal hernias were part of my surgical regimen, and tonsillectomies, and removal of tumors. And I also did OBGYN, deliveries and women's diseases, and did the usual run of simple fractures, the Colles fracture of the wrist, which is very common, and elbow fractures and rib fractures, and tibiofibular leg fractures. They all were part of the regimen.
And I had a student, my very first year at Shelley, I had a student, Charles Nulf, come up to me, and when he found out that I was related to Dr. Petty, he said, "Your dad saved my life." He said, when I was born, my chest was collapsed, and everyone gave up and said, "It's hopeless." And he said, "Your dad got some fishing line, strung it through my sternum, suspended me in an incubation chamber, and here I am today." And he showed me the scar in his chest.
I delivered 3,004 babes, and that was within just 4, 5, 6 numbers of the total population of Shelley in which I practiced. So I replenished the population of Shelley in the 16 years I was there.
We were up doing some field investigations up in the canyons above Shelley at Sellers Creek, and an older gentleman stopped and asked us what we were doing, and when he found out the name was Petty, he said, "Are you related to Dr. Petty?" And we said, "Well, yeah, I think Gene was with me at the time." He said, "That's my father." And he said, "Wow," he said, "he delivered all my kids, and it was $50 a delivery for everything." And he said, you can camp on my land, you can fish on my land, you can come here anytime you want, and bring your dad up here. I'd sure like to see him again."
The Petty family grows right along with the town of Shelley. Their first daughter, Sandy, arrives in the fall of 1952. Wendy follows in the spring of 1956.
I felt our life was complete with 2 darling girls and 2 handsome sons.
So he was the family doctor for our whole town of Shelley, but I call it the family practice because our entire family ran his office. Every night after he would get done seeing patients, my mother would go down and type up the cards. Jean and Jerry would clean the office, and Wendy and I would file x-rays and file cards. And it was a wonderful thing for all of us to continue the work ethic, and it was also kind of a bonding experience for us as a family.
I had the job of dust mopping the office each night and emptying the wastebaskets. After I lettered in football my sophomore year, I approached Father and feeling my employment station should elevate, and he said, "Well, as soon as you can type 60 words a minute, then you can take over the typing of the cards that your mother's doing each evening, and I'll pay you $2 an hour instead of $2 a week." So I audited the typing class in high school so I could learn to type 60 words a minute, and within 3 months I was typing 70 words a minute.
One patient once said to me, "Are you a nurse by training or by marriage?" And I said, "By marriage," and I'm sure training would have been much easier.
We had wonderful family vacations. That was a great memory that we all have as children growing up. No matter how busy my father was at work, we would always take time for a week in Yellowstone. Growing up in our home, we were taught industry, commitment, respect for elders, respect for, it was always Mr. and Mrs., and our teachers were, yes ma'am, yes sir. And a lot of our friends were calling our parents by first names, and boy, if that happened in our house, that would be reason to have your mouth washed out with soap. And we were also taught an awful lot about work and the value of hard work. My mother's famous saying was that it was good for our character. Anytime she gave us an extra job or it was a little hard, she'd say, "Oh, Sandy, this is good for your character." So that has sort of become the joke in our home.
Margaret knows how to get things done in Shelley, Idaho. She organizes the town's first kindergarten, brings driver education to the high school, starts a 4-H club, serves in the church, and much, much more.
Our mother was a very social, outgoing, creative stronghold in our home. And she was always there for us, always busy teaching us, Wendy and I, to cook and sew and make all our clothes. And we learned to love all of those home skills that are forgotten many times these days.
If I needed any costume or I needed anything to be done, she would figure out a way to do it, and she did.
I don't think my mother or my father ever slept, because as I think about it, they were always up busy going. And on family vacations, even if we're in a hotel, especially if we're in a hotel, my father would say, "Okay, 6 a.m. time for calisthenics, let's get up and do the jumping jacks." So they were quite the goers.
But Wendell is going too much. He's the only doctor in town. He's on the school board, a leader in the community, raising a family. He's exhausted, and he's sick.
His practice had grown to the point that it was just overwhelming, and we just couldn't keep up with things.
His doctors said, "Wendell, if you want to live much past the age of 45 or however old he was in his 40s, you're going to need to get out of Shelley."
So he decided to go into ophthalmology, and we ended up in Oakland, California, which was absolutely a dream as far as I was concerned.
We are standing outside of 1938 Clemens Road in Oakland, California, and this was our family home from 1969 until 1971. There's a picture window in the living room, and that was just so fun to sit and look out the window to all of the San Francisco Bay Area. This was a wonderful place to live. The Oakland Temple's just up the hill where we went to church. The gospel of Jesus Christ became very meaningful to Father during the time that we lived here. This was a time that he studied the gospel, that he attended church regularly and faithfully, and I feel he solidified his testimony and felt the Spirit of the Lord and knew that this work was true.
As Wendell's residency winds down in 1971, the family gets ready to return to Idaho. But where?
Wendell had to come back to Idaho. That's where the good fishing is, of course. Trying to find desirable spots for an ophthalmologist. There was a need for one in Twin Falls, and so that's why we decided to come here.
When the Pettys arrive in Twin Falls in July 1971, Jean and Sandy are married. Jerry's away at college, and Wendy is a sophomore in high school. They build this home on Eastland Drive, and Wendell's busy ophthalmology practice is located in this building across from the Twin Falls Hospital. At last, Margaret has a little time.
One thing she was very interested in was modeling and beauty and just making the most of the way she looked. And she took courses to be sure that she knew how to be gracious and look lovely and dress in the best way for success.
Self-improvement or home improvement or whatever. I loved these classes. And Toastmistress was one of the things that I was taking. And you learn how to speak on a minute's notice, and given a subject and 1 minute to figure out how to give a little speech on it. It was wonderful training, and I think it benefited me in many, many occasions.
In 1988, after 17 years as an ophthalmologist in Twin Falls, Dr. Petty retires. He plans to do a lot of fishing and to work on his oil painting. But more important things intervene.
We were called to Washington, D.C. North Mission. We got well acquainted with the younger missionaries and really enjoyed all of our time there with them. After we came home from our mission, we were fortunate enough to be able to work at the Boise Temple.
Margaret and I worked together on a weekly basis in the temple for 12.5 years and enjoyed every bit of it.
That is just such a wonderful way for the golden years of your life to be able to go to the temple where you associate with just the cream of the crop, and you feel like you're doing the Lord's work, and you meet delightful people. It was just a wonderful experience. We really enjoyed that very much.
In 6 decades together, through war, medical school, raising children, 2 medical practices, serving a mission, and working in the temple, Margaret and Wendell Petty have gained an extraordinary understanding of what it takes to forge a strong family.
Emphasize love for and care for your kids. And don't do it just out of following a routine. Do it in the way you live, the way you care for them and love for them. And
one thing that I tried to teach with my children, and that is to treat other people the way you wanted to be treated. And if you see someone that could use a hand up, and you're in a position to try to do it, and I've been so proud of them at different times when I've watched them do this.
And then you hope you develop by the way you live and by the principles you teach, that they grow up in the church. And it's worked pretty well for us, hasn't it?
Dr. Wendell Petty died September 24, 2010. He was 89 years old, a disciplined, self-made man who, with Margaret's help, rose from the humblest of beginnings to extraordinary achievement. They were both widely recognized and often honored in public. But Wendell and Margaret Petty knew that their most important work was accomplished within the walls of their own home, as they guided and inspired the generations that come after them.